You did what? You just gave away food, for free. The manager's voice cut through the diner like a razor, sharp and filled with disbelief. Emma froze in place, her pulse hammering in her chest. Exactly 1 hour later, that same door swung open, and the entire town came pouring in. And all her boss could do was stand there, speechless, as the world shifted around him. So what changed? Who stepped up for Emma and flipped the script? If you believe that kindness always finds its way back, drop a "yes" in the comments. Hey! Move along. You're scaring off the customers. The warmth of the diner was shattered by Carver's voice, slicing through the air like ice. Emma turned just in time to see her boss motioning harshly at an elderly man standing hesitantly in the doorway. The man was buried beneath layers of worn, threadbare clothing, his figure hunched under the cold glow of the neon "open" sign. His head hung low, thin hands buried deep in oversized sleeves, shoulders curled inward as if to shield himself from more than just the cold. He didn't respond. Didn't plead. He simply turned as if ready to vanish, like he was used to being unseen. Emma's chest tightened with a familiar ache. She'd seen this scene before, the way people looked away, walked faster, pretended they saw nothing. And truthfully, she'd done it too. Because sometimes, ignoring it was just easier. But tonight, something shifted inside her. She couldn't walk away. Not this time. Before she even realized what she was doing, she was already moving. Wait, she called, wiping her hands on her apron as she stepped out from behind the counter. The man flinched at the sound of her voice, his body tensing like he expected to be yelled at again. Carver let out an annoyed sigh, clearly running out of patience. Emma paid him no mind. "Sir, would you like to come inside?" Her voice was quiet but firm, carrying a sincerity she couldn't hide. The man lifted his head just slightly, his faded, exhausted eyes meeting hers. He paused, hesitant. Then, almost inaudibly, he murmured. I don't have any money." Emma gave him a small, reassuring smile. "That's all right. This one's on me." There was a long moment of silence. Then, his shoulders sank, as if he was finally letting go of a burden too heavy to carry any longer. She reached out gently, steadying him as he took a shaky step forward. He moved like a man who feared he might be stopped at any moment. The diner fell into a hush. A couple near the window exchanged quiet looks. A man at the counter paused mid-bite, lowering his burger. Someone in the back mumbled something under their breath. A young woman, barely noticeable, slid her phone from her pocket and began recording. Emma acted as if she didn't see any of it. She guided the man to a booth near the heater, the warmest spot in the entire diner. He lowered himself onto the seat gingerly, his hands resting on the table like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. She returned a moment later, setting a hot cup of coffee in front of him. Then, without saying a word, she slipped into the kitchen. A few minutes passed before she came back out, balancing a plate loaded with scrambled eggs, thick slices of toast, and crisp bacon, the kind of meal meant to comfort, not just to feed. "Go ahead, eat," she said softly, setting it down. The old man stared at the plate in disbelief. His hands hovered in the air, uncertain, like reaching out might cause it to disappear. Then, finally, he picked up the fork. That first bite was slow, almost sacred. His sunken cheeks moved gently as he chewed, eyes closing after the swallow, like the warmth itself was something he hadn't felt in years. Emma turned away before he could thank her. She didn't need the gratitude. She had done what felt right, what her heart told her to do. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't have known, was that someone else had seen everything. A few booths away, the young woman who had quietly hit record lowered her phone, her face unreadable. She had captured it all, the compassion, the confrontation, the raw, human moment that hung in the air like a held breath. She stared at her screen, then typed. This waitress fed a homeless man. Her boss wasn't happy. And with one final tap, she hit upload. Emma had no clue that within the next 60 minutes, her entire world was going to flip upside down. The diner buzzed with quiet conversations and the familiar clinking of dishes. The old man took another slow, deliberate bite, his hand still trembling as it wrapped around the fork. Behind the counter, Emma watched him for a moment, and a soft warmth settled in her chest, just enough to ease the tightness in her ribs. Then, the energy in the room shifted. A voice snapped through the air like the crack of a whip. Emma! She jumped, the plates in her hands rattling from the shock. Spinning toward the sound, she found Mr. Carver, her manager, charging forward, his face flushed with rage. Each heavy step echoed off the tile floor like a warning drumbeat. And all around them, heads turned. Every customer in the diner was suddenly watching. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked, his words bouncing off the walls. Emma swallowed hard, the old man now sinking deeper into his booth. The warmth that had been blooming in her heart only moments ago vanished, replaced by a sinking chill that wrapped tight around her gut. She began, but Carver didn't let her finish. "You think this is some kind of charity? We're just handing out food now." His voice practically dripped with condescension, pitched loud enough to ensure no one in the restaurant could miss a word. The elderly man visibly recoiled, nudging his plate away as if expecting it to be taken from him. "Sir, he's hungry," Emma said, her tone calm but quiet. "It was only one meal. I said I'd pay for it." "You'll pay for it?" Carver cut in, laughing sharply without a hint of humor. "With what money, exactly? From what paycheck?" Emma's body went still. "Consider your paycheck gone." The words hit like a punch, swift, cold, unforgiving. The room fell into complete silence. Carver's declaration seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the smell of coffee and grease. A few customers looked away, shifting in their seats. One woman near the register frowned, but stayed silent. A man in a suit folded his napkin, left it on the table, and walked out without saying a word. Emma felt the heat building behind her eyes, but she refused to let a single tear fall. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. "Understood," she replied, barely more than a whisper. Carver scoffed and turned on his heel, shaking his head in disgust. "This is exactly why people like that keep coming around," he muttered. "Give them something for free, and they never leave. Like stray dogs." The man in the booth winced, as if those words had landed like a slap across his face. Emma's hands curled into tight fists. Have you ever watched someone get treated like they didn't matter? If you believe kindness should be protected, not punished, hit subscribe to QH Incredible Stories. Some moments are too important to stay silent about. She wanted to yell. To tell Carver how wrong he was. That compassion wasn't a business deal. That not everything in life needed to turn a profit. But she knew saying it wouldn't change a thing. Men like him, people like that, they never listened. So instead, she turned her attention back to the old man. Her voice softened. "It's okay," she said gently. "Go ahead. Please finish your food." But he didn't. His appetite had vanished. Slowly, he pushed the plate away. Across the room, in a quiet corner, a man lowered his phone. He had been recording the entire exchange. He had captured everything, the kindness, the cruelty, the moment that revealed so much more than words ever could. Emma didn't notice him. She was too busy holding herself together, trying not to let the moment break her. The man stared at his screen, frowning slightly as he watched the footage again. Then, after a deep breath, he tapped the screen. And hit upload. The tension in the diner didn't vanish, but slowly, things began to return to their usual rhythm. Voices resumed in hushed tones. Plates clinked again. Silverware scraped against ceramic. But Emma felt the shift. She could feel the difference in the air. She moved through the motions like a ghost, clearing dishes, refilling mugs, keeping her head down and eyes low. She could feel the weight of glances, some sympathetic, some judgmental. The ones who sided with Carver stayed quiet. And the ones who didn't? They stayed quiet too. Until one of them didn't. At the far end of the counter, a woman suddenly rose to her feet. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cutting through the murmur of the diner. Carver, busy pouring himself a fresh cup of coffee behind the counter, barely looked up. "Put his meal on my tab," she said simply. Silence followed. The kind that hangs in the air like held breath. Carver set the coffee pot down with a sharp, deliberate clink. "That won't be necessary," he replied coldly. But the woman didn't back down. Her face stayed calm, steady. "I think it is," she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. A ripple moved through the room, quiet gasps, hushed whispers. The atmosphere was shifting. Then another man raised his hand. "I'll cover it." "Count me in too," someone else chimed from the corner. Emma stood frozen, stunned, speechless. In a matter of moments, nearly half the people in the diner had offered to pay for a meal that was already served, already eaten. A gesture that didn't undo what had happened, but said loud and clear, they were with her. Carver's jaw tightened. He looked from the growing crowd to Emma, then scoffed like the whole scene offended him. "Do whatever you want," he muttered. And with that, he turned and walked away, like the sight of people showing compassion made his skin crawl. Emma wasn't sure what to feel, relief, disbelief, or the sting of tears she refused to let fall. She turned back to the old man, who was still sitting quietly in the booth, now watching the crowd around him in awe. His lips trembled, and when he finally looked up at her, his eyes glistened. "Thank you," he whispered. Emma fought the lump rising in her throat and gave him a soft smile. Outside, the night was still bitter with cold. But inside the diner, something was thawing. Something important was starting to change. Someone had caught the entire moment on camera. The video was already making the rounds, and Emma's simple act of kindness wasn't just staying within those four walls. Very soon, the whole town would see it. Emma didn't know any of that as she quietly bussed tables and refilled mugs of coffee. Her body moved out of habit, but her mind was far away. Carver's harsh words still echoed inside her like bruises. The weight of everything sat heavy on her chest. She knew she had done the right thing. And yet, somehow, it still felt like she was drowning. She didn't see the man in the corner quietly slide his phone into his pocket after hitting upload. She didn't see the first buzz of phones lighting up all across town. She didn't hear the early stirrings of anger and support spreading through group chats, comment sections, and late-night conversations. Not yet. Across town, in a dim living room, Frank Dalton sat scrolling through his phone. A retired veteran, he was used to the usual, news flashes, political rants, sports clips. The stuff that never really surprised him anymore. But then something different caught his eye. A freshly uploaded video. He tapped play. The footage was shaky, obviously filmed with a phone, but the scene was clear as day, a young waitress kneeling beside a homeless man, offering him food and a kind smile. The man hesitated. Then slowly, he accepted. But before long, the mood shifted. The camera caught the manager storming over, voice rising with anger for all to hear. "You think this is a charity? Your paycheck is gone." Frank's jaw tensed. He watched the whole thing again, this time more carefully, seeing how Emma didn't flinch, how the man shrank back, how the entire room sat frozen in silence. Then he scrolled through the comments. "Unbelievable. This is disgusting. That poor girl. Where is this diner? Someone needs to step in." Frank didn't think twice. He hit the share button and typed 4 simple words. "This is not okay." Then he stood up, grabbed his coat, and headed straight for the door. Back inside the diner, Emma was wiping down a table, lost in her own thoughts. Everything still felt heavy. Then suddenly, something shifted. The bell above the door jingled, breaking the quiet. Several customers looked up. Emma did too, and froze. A small group had just stepped inside. Not just the usual customers, but locals. And more were following behind them. Emma's brows drew together in confusion as she wiped her hands on her apron. Something about this felt different. She glanced toward Carver, who was off to the side, casually pouring himself another cup of coffee, completely unaware. The bell chimed again. And again. Within minutes, the place was crowded. But these weren't just hungry patrons. They stood quietly, arms folded, their faces unreadable, like they had come for something else entirely. Then one man stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his tone steady, calm, but unmistakably firm. "We're here to speak with the waitress who helped the homeless man earlier." Emma blinked, startled. The room fell into a hushed stillness. Carver finally looked up, his brows drawing into a sharp frown. "And who exactly are you?" he asked, voice tense. "Concerned citizens," the man replied simply. "We saw the video." Carver's face lost a little color. "Video?" But before he could get another word out, the diner's front door opened again, this time with a very different kind of arrival. A news crew walked in. Emma's stomach turned. A woman holding a microphone stepped inside, followed closely by a cameraman. The camera was already rolling. "We're here to cover a story that's been circulating online," the reporter said as she scanned the room. Her gaze landed on Emma. "Are you Emma?" Emma's mouth went dry. Yes. "Would you be willing to answer a few questions?" the reporter asked, gently but directly. "People all over town are talking about what you did, and how your boss responded." Carver let out a harsh sigh. "Absolutely not," he barked. "You're disrupting my business." But before he could continue, a voice cut through the room. "Business?" Everyone turned. It was Frank Dalton. The retired veteran stepped forward, his face stern and filled with quiet conviction. He turned toward the reporter. "You want to understand what happened here," he said, pointing a firm finger at Carver. "This man punished a young woman for showing simple human decency, for giving food to someone who was clearly in need." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Heads nodded. A few people murmured their agreement aloud. Carver tried to regain control. "She broke the rules," he said sharply. But this time, his voice lacked its usual bite. It shook just a little. Frank didn't even blink. "Then maybe," he said, his voice like steel, "it's the rules that need fixing." Emma's heart was pounding in her chest. The camera focused in on her. The reporter leaned forward slightly, her expression soft but expectant. "Emma, how do you feel about everything that's happened tonight?" Emma swallowed hard. She looked toward the old man, still sitting quietly in the booth, his eyes shimmering with emotion. Then she looked at the people who had come, not to eat, but to stand with her. And finally, she looked at Carver, who was visibly sweating, clearly shaken by the way things had turned. Emma took a deep, steadying breath. "I don't think I did anything extraordinary," she said, her voice calm and honest. "I saw someone who needed help, so I helped." The room froze. And then, applause erupted. Not just from the group that had come in to support her, but from other customers too. Total strangers clapped, their faces lit with something between pride and hope. And then the camera caught one more thing. Carver. He was stepping back, hands balled into fists, his expression impossible to read. The question wasn't if people stood with Emma anymore. The only question left was, what was Carver going to do now? Outside, the cold air bit through the streets. But online? The town was on fire. Social media had exploded. The video was everywhere. Comment after comment rolled in, fury, praise, outrage, support. She deserves better. They should fire Carver. Where is this place? I'll never eat there again. And by the time the local news stations picked up the story, it wasn't just a small-town conversation anymore. It had become a national one. Back inside the diner, Carver's face burned red. He could feel the tide turning against him, everything he thought he controlled now slipping fast through his grasp. His eyes darted from Emma to the news crew to the crowd of people who were no longer silent. This was unraveling. Fast. He opened his mouth, probably to shout, to take charge again, to remind everyone who ran the place. But before a single word could leave his lips, the door opened. Again. And another wave of townspeople stepped inside. They didn't pull out phones. They didn't shout questions. They just stood there, arms crossed, silent, but not passive. They were there with purpose. And the moment Emma saw them, she understood. This wasn't finished. The diner felt like it was holding its breath. The tension clung to the walls, heavy and thick. Emma could feel every stare pressing in on her from all sides. The news camera was still running, capturing every second, her expression, the crowd, the way Mr. Carver's jaw clenched like it might snap from the pressure. He was losing his grip, and everyone knew it. Her words still hung in the air like a banner. I just saw someone who needed help, and I helped. So simple. So human. And now, that truth had traveled to hundreds, maybe thousands, of people watching it all unfold on their screens. Carver let out a bitter scoff, trying to claw back a sense of control. This is ridiculous, he barked. You're all blowing this out of proportion. This is my restaurant. My business. And I make the rules. A voice rang out from the crowd. What kind of business punishes someone for being kind? A ripple moved through the room, nods, quiet agreements, murmurs of yeah and exactly. Carver's nostrils flared. His frustration was boiling over now. He turned on Emma, pointing a shaking finger. You don't get it. You have no idea what kind of mess you've caused. Because of your little stunt, I've got a mob in here. Emma clenched her hands at her sides, fists tightening, but she held back. She didn't need to say a word. Because just then, the diner's doors opened once more. And this time, the entire place went still. A tall man stepped inside, broad-shouldered, clean-cut, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit that said power without trying. His presence immediately shifted the room. He didn't speak right away. He simply adjusted the cuffs of his jacket and took a long, calm look around. Then his eyes found Emma. And locked in. Is she the one? The man asked, his deep voice slicing clean through the silence that had settled over the room. Frank Dalton stepped forward without hesitation and gave a single, firm nod. Yeah, he said. That's her. The man's sharp, calculating blue eyes shifted toward Carver. And you're the owner here? Carver straightened up fast, tugging at his tie like it gave him more authority than he actually had. That's right. Who wants to know? The man stepped closer and held out his hand, confident and controlled. Langford. Victor Langford. A ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. Gasps. Whispers. People turning to one another with wide eyes. Emma froze. Victor Langford. The Victor Langford. The man behind Langford Hospitality Group, one of the biggest names in luxury dining and upscale hotels across the country. Carver's smirk faltered like a light bulb flickering before it burned out. Mr. Langford, I had no idea you were. Watching you humiliate yourself on a national stage. Langford interrupted, cool as ice. Yeah. You're just now figuring that out. Color drained from Carver's face. Langford barely acknowledged him after that. He turned his attention to Emma, and for a moment, his tone softened, just slightly. I saw the video, he said. And I saw what you did. Emma's heart pounded so loud she could barely hear the words. She wasn't sure how to respond. You remind me of someone, Langford continued. My mother. She used to run a small diner, back before I ever made $1. She had one rule: if someone's hungry, you feed them. No exceptions. Ever. Emma's throat grew tight. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. Langford glanced over at the old man still sitting quietly in the booth, his plate now empty, his eyes wide and glistening as he watched it all unfold. Langford looked back to Emma. You lived by that rule tonight, he said gently. Even when it cost you something. Emma's voice was barely a breath. It just felt like the right thing to do. Langford nodded once. It was. And then, just like that, the warmth disappeared from his face. He turned back to Carver, and his tone shifted from kind to cutting in an instant. And you? He asked coldly, tilting his head. Tell me, what exactly have you contributed tonight? Carver stuttered, scrambling for footing. Look, I was just following protocol. You run businesses too, you know how it is. There are policies. You have to enforce them. Langford's eyes narrowed, voice sharp enough to draw blood. I know the difference between policy and cruelty, he said. And I know there are two kinds of business owners in this world, those who build their companies on integrity, and those who build them on fear. He let the words hang in the air for a beat, the silence around them thick and heavy. Now you tell me, Langford continued, leaning in just enough to drive it home. Which one do you think people still believe in when the lights go off and the money dries up? Carver couldn't say a word. He just stood there, lips parted, no sound coming out. Langford stepped back, let out a long exhale, and shook his head as if he already knew the answer. Then, turning to Emma once more, his voice gentled again. I'd like to offer you a job. The entire room inhaled, sharply, all at once. Emma's mouth fell open, caught between disbelief and the hope she hadn't dared to feel yet. What? Langford smiled faintly, but his voice stayed steady. A management position, he said. At one of my restaurants. It comes with better pay, real benefits, and a boss who actually understands what decency looks like. Emma's world tilted just a little. A management role? With Langford Hospitality Group? This wasn't just an offer. It was a door to a whole new life. She opened her mouth to respond. But no words came out. Langford gave her a soft smile, the kind that said he understood, the whirlwind of emotion storming inside her, the disbelief, the nerves, the hope. Take your time, he said gently. But let me be clear, people like you. We need more of them in this industry. Behind them, the old man sitting at the booth couldn't stop smiling, his whole face lit up with quiet joy. Frank Dalton stepped beside Emma and clapped a strong, supportive hand on her shoulder, his grin wide with pride. And just like that, the crowd erupted into applause. And Carver? He looked like he'd just bitten into something sour, like the truth had left a bitter taste he couldn't spit out. Emma turned toward him, half bracing for another angry explosion, another attempt to take control. But it never came. There was only silence. Only that dawning realization, the kind that settles slow and sharp, that he'd lost. Carver cleared his throat awkwardly. You know what, he said, voice low and strained, maybe I overreacted. Maybe we could just. Langford raised his hand, stopping him cold. We're done here. Carver's jaw clenched. His face flushed deep red with embarrassment. He didn't argue. He didn't fight. He just turned, walked past Langford, past Emma, and vanished into the back office like a man trying to outrun his own regret. The second the door shut behind him, the diner came alive again. People cheered. Someone even whistled. Applause broke out louder than before. Emma finally exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Frank leaned in beside her, nudging her playfully. Well? Emma looked at Langford, still stunned, like she was waiting to wake up from all of it. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. I accept. The room exploded with celebration. The old man dabbed at his eyes, overcome with emotion. Emma looked around at the sea of faces, most of them strangers just hours earlier, now standing with her, not because they had to, but because they chose to. This one simple act of kindness had grown into something so much bigger than she could have imagined. And in that moment, she knew. It had all been worth it. For a few seconds, she didn't move. She couldn't. Emma stood there like her feet were glued to the floor, trying to absorb what had just happened. The applause blurred into the background, distant and echoey, like she was outside herself, watching it all unfold from a place just above. Her whole life, people had told her the same things. Kindness doesn't pay the bills. Rules are rules. Put yourself first. But now? Now she was standing in the middle of a diner, surrounded by strangers turned allies, being offered a future she never dared to picture. And all of it, every single bit, because she chose not to look away when someone was hungry and cold. I accept, she had said, her own voice barely recognizable. And those two simple words. They changed everything. The next morning, Emma's name was on everyone's lips. The story had spread far beyond the little town. It had reached news outlets, social media feeds, influencers with massive followings, and even national headlines. Kindness comes at a cost. Until it doesn't. Waitress fired for feeding a homeless man, then this happened. A lesson in compassion, what one small town did will restore your faith in humanity. Emma's phone buzzed non-stop. It was like her notifications had turned into a tidal wave. Messages poured in from all corners of the country. Some people shared their own stories, times they helped someone and got reprimanded for it. Others simply said thank you, for reminding them that goodness still existed in the world. Langford's office called bright and early. Are you ready? His assistant asked, upbeat and direct. We've got a manager's position waiting with your name on it. Your new chapter starts today. Emma paused, just for a second. Then she smiled, steady, sure. I'm ready. Meanwhile, across town, the place where it had all begun sat in an eerie silence. Carver stood alone in his office, glaring down at his phone as he scrolled through article after article. Each headline was a fresh slap to the face. His diner, once just another quiet little corner of the neighborhood, was now infamous. But not in the way he ever wanted. His phone had rung non-stop that morning. And not one call had been about a reservation. Reporters. Bloggers. Angry locals. One after another, they called to say the same thing. They wouldn't be coming back. Even his regulars, the ones he thought would always have his back, had disappeared without a word. And for the first time in his entire career, Carver came to terms with a truth he'd never wanted to face. Reputation matters. And his was in pieces. Emma stood at the entrance of her new workplace, taking a deep breath as she stepped inside. It felt like walking into a completely different world. The restaurant was sleek and modern, with soft lighting and the kind of energy that buzzed without ever feeling chaotic. Servers in perfectly pressed uniforms floated between tables with practiced grace, balancing dishes that looked more like artwork than meals. The air was warm and rich with the scent of sizzling meats and fresh bread straight from the oven. This wasn't just a job. It was a fresh start. Langford met her at the door, his expression kind, confident, like he already knew she'd belong here. Welcome to the team, Emma. She let out a slow breath and shook his hand, firm and grateful. Thank you. For everything. Langford chuckled. Don't thank me just yet. You've still got a lot to learn. He smiled. But something tells me, you're going to be just fine. And deep down, Emma knew he was right. Because she'd already learned the most important lesson of all. Doing the right thing. It's not always easy. Sometimes it comes with a cost. But in the end, kindness always finds its way back. A few weeks later, something surprising happened. Carver's Diner officially closed its doors. No grand announcement. No farewell letter. Just a handwritten, closed sign in the window one morning, and that was it. Some said it was the backlash. Others blamed the financial fallout. A few wondered if the guilt had finally caught up to him. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. The town didn't miss it. Because something better had taken its place. A brand new restaurant opened in that very spot. It wasn't upscale. It wasn't trendy. And it didn't need to be. Because this place had a reputation that didn't rely on reviews or fancy plating. It was built on something simpler, something stronger. Right there on the front window, in bold, hand-painted letters, was a rule that said everything. If someone is hungry, we feed them. Emma stood outside on opening day, a hot coffee cupped in her hands, her breath curling in the crisp morning air. She looked up at the sign and smiled. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. That night, when she chose to feed a man the world had stopped seeing. She didn't just rewrite her own story. She changed the heart of her town. Have you ever seen a simple act of kindness grow into something bigger than anyone imagined? Because sometimes, it only takes one person to start a ripple. And sometimes, that ripple becomes a wave. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. In today's fast-paced world, kindness often gets pushed to the background. People are rushing. Distracted. Unsure if stepping in is the right move, or if it's even their place. But Emma's story? It reminds us of something we've started to forget. One quiet act of compassion can spark something extraordinary. She didn't help that homeless man for applause. She didn't do it to go viral. She did it because it was simply the right thing to do. And yet, that one decision, it didn't just change his life. It changed an entire community. How many times have we seen someone struggling and told ourselves, "It's not my problem." Maybe it was an elderly man counting coins at a checkout counter. A single parent trying to juggle too much. A neighbor who needed help but was too proud to ask. It's easy to turn away. But imagine if, instead, we stepped forward. If we chose to care, even when no one was watching. Because here's the truth. The world doesn't shift because of viral speeches or flashy headlines. Real change comes from the little things. From everyday people doing the right thing when it matters most. It's those quiet, often unnoticed moments that ripple outward. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that made you stop and feel something real? That reminded you that the world, despite everything, still has good in it? We'd love to hear it. Drop your story in the comments. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, subscribe to Uncovered Tales. Because here, we don't just tell stories that change lives. We tell stories that change hearts.